Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Okay, well, before we get into it, I just want to say thank you to everyone who came along to the book launch shows in Perth on the weekend. Gosh, that was so much fun and there were such great shows and it was so lovely to meet you all. If you couldn't come to the show and you are in Perth, I did go to about 8 different bookshops on the Friday and sign stock for all those different bookshops. So I went to Paperbird Books, the Beaufort Street Bookshop, the Lane Bookshop, Dimmock Subiaco, and a bunch more. You can, if you look on Instagram, you'll see all the different shops I went to. And so, yeah, if you want to get a signed copy of one of my books, you can go to one of those shops. New Edition, that's another bookshop I went to there. It was just such a great weekend. Anyway, so I was saying I was going to do Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat this week, and I've just been writing it crazily all day today because I've got to head off to Port Macquarie up the coast tomorrow. It's about 5 hours drive from here. So I've got to try. It's quite late here. It's like 20 past 10 when I'm recording this. So I'm hopefully going to record this now and then maybe edit it tomorrow when I'm up in Port Macquarie so it can drop on time on Wednesday. We'll see how we go. It's actually quite a big story, so I might just do half this week and half next week. We'll see how we go. Anyway, what other news we have? I think that's it. I think now the book is launched. That's it now. We've just got the Christmas shows coming up, which I've talked about before. If you want to come along, if you're in Sydney, Canberra or Brisbane, tickets are on sale. You can go to my website, rasprat.com, and just click on the live show tab in the banner. And there's all the information there. All right, so let's just get into today's story. I'll open up the document. So today I'm telling the story of Joseph and his multicoloured coat, as told by Nanny Piggins. When Derek, Samantha and Michael got home from school, they had some exciting news to share with Nanny Piggins and Boris. "We're doing Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat for the school musical," said Samantha. "That's lovely," said Nanny Piggins. "Will you be auditioning for the part of Josephine?" "You mean Joseph," said Samantha, although as soon as the words were out of her mouth, she realised her nanny may have an alternative view. "Oh, no," said Nanny Piggins. "Joseph wasn't Joseph's real name. That was her alias. Her real name was Josephine." "So she was a woman?" asked Michael. "And a pig?" guessed Derek. "Well, she was a woman so spectacularly talented and beloved she drove her sisters to a murderous rage of jealousy," said Nanny Piggins. "To be that spectacular, of course she was a Piggins." "In the musical version and the Bible version, the story is about Joseph and his 11 brothers," said Samantha. "Are you saying that the brothers weren't brothers either, that they were sisters?" "Yes," said Nanny Piggins. That subterfuge was hard to keep up. There was a lot of false moustache wearing to fool everyone. Even the people who wrote the Bible didn't realise the real truth. "But why would they all want to pretend to be men?" asked Derek. "Property laws," said Nanny Piggins. "Property laws?" asked Derek. "Yes, in the ancient Judean times," said Nanny Piggins, "women couldn't own property, especially women pigs. It was a very piggish time. Although the ancient Judeans didn't eat bacon, so in some ways they were much more enlightened than today." "And no one realised?" asked Derek. "They were very good false moustaches," said Nanny Piggins. "Thick and bushy with long handlebar sides. They'd fool anybody. Plus, remember, my relatives have always been very gifted actresses." "You're going to have to tell us the whole story," said Michael. "All right, I will," said Nanny Piggins. "But let's make chocked up ice creams first. Then we can pretend we're at the theatre seeing the show live as I tell the tale." 20 minutes later, they were eating chocolate-covered chocolate ice cream cones as they scrunched in close next to Nanny Piggins on the couch, and she began her story. As I say, it all took place in the ancient Judean story days. And when I say ancient, I mean really ancient. Long before the Roman Empire and before Jesus was born, there was a man called Jacob. Was he a pig? Asked Michael. No, said Nanny Piggins, he was just a man. But we shouldn't hold that against him. It wasn't his fault. Anyway, he had 12 daughters, who he thought were sons, called Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Wait, he didn't realise his own children were girls and pigs? Asked Samantha. Men can be very unobservant, said Nanny Piggins. How many times have you seen your own father searching for his car keys, when I have just announced that I was taking his car and driven off with it? The answer was quite a few, so the children nodded. Now, the ancient Judean story days, being so long ago, were a time before modern psychology or parenting books or really any behavioural standards of any kind. So even though Jacob had 12 children, he let everyone know he had one who he loved more than the others, and that was Joseph. But that's terrible, said Samantha. Yeah, said Derek, our father isn't always the best father, but at least we know he is disinterested in us equally. He doesn't have favourites or least favourites. To be fair to Jacob, said Nanny Piggins, Joseph was spectacular. She was smart, helpful, charming, athletic, and most importantly, staggeringly beautiful. She also had the bushiest fake moustache in all of Judea. It would have been very hard for anyone not to love her the most. Then why did her sisters hate her? Asked Samantha. Was she evil? Asked Michael. No, said Nanny Piggins, quite the reverse. She wasn't just gorgeous and clever, she also had an amazing talent. What was it? Asked Derek. She could interpret dreams, said Nanny Piggins. Huh? Said Michael. She could tell you what your dreams meant. I thought dreams didn't mean anything, said Michael. Well, her dreams did, said Nanny Piggins. She had dreams that foretold the future. In what way? Asked Samantha. Well, one day she had a dream about the wheat harvest, said Nanny Piggins. That doesn't sound like a very exciting dream, said Michael. No, but wheat was harvested differently back in ancient times, said Nanny Piggins. It was cut by hand. The sisters would all go out in the field and cut sheaves of wheat. Well, one night, Josephine had a dream that when they gathered up all their sheaves of wheat at the end of the day, all the 11 sisters' sheaves bowed to her sheaf. How does a sheaf bow? Asked Derek. Derek, are you applying logic to a story again? Asked Nanny Piggins. Because it's bad enough applying logic to a story, but applying logic to a story about a dream? A 2,000-year-old dream, no less. Well, that's just ridiculous. Sorry, Nanny Piggins, said Derek. I don't know what came over me. And you've got to understand that Josephine was the second youngest. Only Benjamina was younger than her. So all her older sisters did not appreciate her dreaming about their corn bowing. It made them very grumpy. And there was no cake or chocolate back in the ancient Judean story days, so people were even grumpier then than they are now. Oh dear, said Boris. Things came to a head when Jacob bought Josephine a coat, said Nanny Piggins. It was a ridiculous thing to do because Judea is right on the Mediterranean. It's a very warm climate. I don't see why anyone would need a coat. But it wasn't just a regular coat, it was a spectacular coat, made out of fabric in every colour of the rainbow. That doesn't sound very fashionable, said Samantha. Were bright colours in at the time? Well, fashion magazines hadn't been invented yet either, said Nanny Piggins, so there was no system for making people feel bad about what they enjoyed wearing. Jacob got the coat because he thought it was beautiful. It was certainly eye-catching. Judea has a lot of desert and scrub, so I can imagine having a staggeringly beautiful pig with a big, bushy, fake moustache walking around wearing a rainbow coat would have been very attention-grabbing, which is what Jacob wanted. He wanted to show off how much he loved his favourite child. But for the sisters, that coat was the last straw. Even though it would have been swelteringly hot to wear a coat in their climate, and rainbow would not have suited their complexions at all, they were all burning with jealousy, so they decided to kill Josephine. What? Said Michael. That's extreme, said Derek. Couldn't they just run the coat through the machine on a hot wash so all the colours ran and it didn't fit her anymore? Asked Samantha. I think things had gone beyond that, said Nanny Piggins. Remember, there was no chocolate cake back then, so it was a brutally difficult time. The sisters were probably desperately hand-chock-cakery. What's hand-chock-cakery? Asked Michael. Well, you know how if you get really hungry, you become angry, and people call that hangry? Well, hand-chock-cakery is when you become so hungry for chocolate cake, you become angry. Is that really a thing? Asked Derek. It is in my family, said Nanny Piggins. We Piggins have a genetic disposition for this ailment. It's a struggle no researcher has been able to resolve. Have medical researchers been trying to resolve it? Asked Samantha. Not medical researchers, no, said Nanny Piggins. They're so obsessed with all the usual things, you know, curing the common cold, curing cancer, curing heart disease, said Nanny Piggins. So the workload has fallen on cake-based researchers. Fortunately, several members of the Piggins family do have PhDs in groundbreaking cake-based research, so we are optimistic there may one day be a breakthrough. Although most of them do focus on how to make cake even more delicious, still science often makes breakthroughs accidentally when they're trying to do something else. Antibiotics were only invented when Alexander Fleming was too lazy to put his morning tea in the bin and it went mouldy. So hopefully, one day the hand-chock-cakery epidemic will be overcome. Is it an epidemic if it only affects one family of pigs? Asked Derek. Well, it feels like an epidemic if you're in that one family of pigs, said Nanny Piggins. The children nodded. This sounded fair enough. And Nanny Piggins continued on with her story. So the 10 older sisters invited Josephine to go out into the desert with them for a nice picnic. Oh, what sort of picnic? Asked Josephine. The delicious kind, said Levi. With lots of food, said Gad. I do like food, said Josephine. All right. So she went out into the desert with her older sisters, and they walked a long way. Are you sure the desert is a good place for a picnic? Asked Josephine. Won't it be a bit hot? I wouldn't have worn my rainbow coat if I'd known we were going to be hiking in a desert. We're nearly there, said Asher. Where? Asked Josephine. It all looks much the same to me. It's all very deserty, which is very nice, but we do have a lot of desert back at the house as well. We don't really have to walk all this way to look at this bit of desert. There's one particular bit of desert we want you to look at, Dan explained. Over here, said Reuben, pointing to a spot on the ground. What is it? Asked Josephine. It's an incredibly deep pit, said Levi. Josephine looked down into the pit. What's so interesting about that? She asked. It's your new home, said Asher, giving Josephine a great big shove, so she tumbled forward into the pit. Thud! Ow! Said Josephine as she hit the bottom. What are you doing? But the sisters had run off. They wanted to get away from the scene of the crime. But they hadn't gone far when they came across some travelling slave traders. Slave traders, said Michael. Did slave traders just walk around back then? Oh, yes, slaves were quite the thing in the ancient Middle Eastern story days, said Nanny Piggins. Lots of people had them. If you wanted to renovate your home or do up your bathroom, you just got a few slaves to do it for you. If you wanted to build a massive pyramid that would last for 3,000 years, you just got a few thousand slaves to do it for you. It's much easier to implement a public works program when you don't have to pay your workforce. Anyway, the slave traders were happy to take on Josephine. They threw her on the back of their camel and set off for Egypt, and the sisters went home. But how did they explain all that to their dad when they got home? Asked Michael. Well, they took Josephine's rainbow coat and ripped it up and smeared goat's blood on it so it looked like she'd been in a terrible accident. What sort of accident? Asked Michael. A head-on collision with a camel, said Nanny Piggins. And Jacob believed that? Asked Samantha. Oh, yes, it happened all the time back then, said Nanny Piggins. There were some reckless camel drivers in the ancient story days. Naturally, Jacob was devastated, and the sisters all pretended to be devastated too, but they were secretly pleased with how well it had all turned out. They'd gotten rid of Josephine without having to deal with all the unpleasant, racking guilt that they would have had if they'd really killed her. You know, they were really bad siblings, said Samantha. Yes, I know, agreed Nanny Piggins. Almost as bad as my own sisters, who, as you know, are all evil in unique ways. But even they are not evil enough to try and kill me or sell me, although they have thrown me in pits on several occasions, and they did encourage the ringmaster to kidnap me. But they did that free of charge. Anyway, we'll leave the story there. What? Exclaimed Michael. But Josephine's in terrible trouble, said Derek. What happened to her? Asked Samantha. Oh, I'll tell you all that after the ice cream break, said Nanny Piggins, as she sprinted off to the kitchen. All right, so we're going to leave it there, and I will tell the second half of the story next week. And never fear, I've written it already. This story just blew out really long. It's a very long and awesome story. So I'll tell you the second half next week. Okay, so until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.